Okay. May hapon sa atong tanan, no? Usab. Una gusto na ako magpasalamat sa organizers aning webinar sa iSafe program of Xavier University College of Agriculture. And I would like to extend my gratitude to our Dean, Maria Rosario Mosqueda, Dean of the College of Agriculture, for giving me the honor to invite me in this webinar series. Now, I would like also to greet some of our colleagues in the agriculture industry. My good friend, Dr. Edgar Allan Po, used to be part of the College of Agriculture. I'm sure he's quite interested, if not participating in this webinar series also. And to all the participants and guests, I thought all the while that I'm not the only speaker for today. So anyhow, and to all the resource persons, not just for today, but for the whole program of the iSafe program of Xavier University. Let me start with my presentation. This my opening cover page actually saying Postharvest Development, the bridge to empower our farmers. So this is what I will try to expound this afternoon. And as I've earlier discussed with Dean Mosqueda, post-harvest, I would like to think, and for my philosophy, post-harvest is public good, like putting up a bridge. So when you have the bridge, this will empower our farmers. So it's a critical public good. Now, the other principle is post-harvest is not the responsibility of our farmers. And this is ironic, or this is a paradox, when we say inclusive, yet it's not their responsibility. Our farmers, in particular our corn farmers, they're supposed to be good at planting corn. That's their role. That's their primary role, and to be good at it, and hopefully they can derive livelihood out of it. Post-harvest is not supposed to be part of the burden of the farmer. And when he plants corn, the moment he has that even the intention to plant corn, post-harvest is something that he has already have in mind. And that's what we tried to do with when we came up with the Mindanao grain, so that when the farmers decide to plant corn, he knows already that he can go to Mindanao Grains to deliver his corn on cob. But beyond that, there are other issues and other developments that we were hoping that we could do more, move forward, do extra mile with Mindanao Grains. And it will still take a lot of changes in government policies for us to be able to do, in which I would be explaining later. Next, please. So I would like to start also from next slide, please. Secretariat. Yes. According to Norman Borlaug, he's a Nobel Prize laureate who started CGR, which Erie is one of the facility. Civilization as it is known today could not have evolved, nor it can survive without adequate food supply. So this would just highlight the role of our farmers. And in the next slide, our global population is already more than 7 billion. And as our population grows and economy gets better, our preference for food, as population gets to have a better livelihood, better income, this um, uh, new economic freedom will also change the eating pattern, the nutrition food requirement pattern of the population, and it would require more consumption of livestock, no? And higher quality food, and it will entail much more production of grains to support livestock production in the Philippines. Can you go? Our population is already at around 109 million, and this will explode to about 150 million by 2015. Next, please. Next slide, please. By grow to 192 million by 2015. Next slide, please. This slide will show, the vicious cycle that our farmers are actually experiencing, no? And in this vicious cycle, this is this is a known fact, no, already. So many of us are very aware of these problems among our farmers, especially among small farmers. And our role is to break this vicious cycle. And critical to this is actually in the investment of post-harvest. Next, please. In the next slide, if we look at government programs and the resources where our government is focusing, it's primarily actually invested in the production program. So, and also in the marketing. No? And much of the resources of government, because it is more popular among farmers and popular among politicians, most of the resources are concentrated on seed and fertilizer subsidies. No? And it is and then we also have some token programs in the marketing by coming up with market matching, and then from time to time they come up with a support price. This is not well sustained, and especially now that with the passage of the rice tariffication law, no? And inadvertently, which included also some key policies that would affect the corn sector, no? And particular to this is the role of NFA in coming up with a support price. Although NFA has not been very consistent with its program in coming up with support price implementation, but yet it is very important that government institutions should have that role. No? I'm sure that earlier in your webinar series, Engineer Navarro has tackled the policy issues, no, especially on the support price, which is it's a global norm, no? In most countries, especially for primary industries like grains, no, there's always a support price to encourage farmers to plant, no? And it is really part of their program. And we also have, to some level in the Philippines, but now there's a disarray in how this support price program is supposedly sustained by the government, despite the passage of the rice tariffication law, because we still have the Magna Carta of Small Farmers, or Republic Act 7160, which was not repealed by the RTL. So, in other words, the support price is still there as a responsibility of the government. No? And it's the number one right of the farmers acknowledged by government as expressed in that law. Now, if you look at this slide, not much of the funding is actually given for post-harvest. No? As I've said, post-harvest is supposed to be public good. No? It should be treated like a bridge. No? It is supposed to be a public infrastructure, which is not being funded by the government. Although from time to time, there are token budget. No? But if you look at the magnitude of the investment required to cover the post-harvest, we have more than 1 million hectares of corn right now, no? Physical area planted to corn. And for us to modernize the post-harvest, we need a budget of at least 100,000 pesos per one hectare of corn planted. So in other words, we need at least 100 billion for every 1 million hectare of corn that is being developed for planting. Now, we have a government program that is only allocating less than 1 billion a year. In other words, before we can fill up that gap, it will take us probably 100 years, no, before we can put up the proper post-harvest for our farmers. And it is, to be blunt about it, irresponsible, no? Because especially that our government is trying to come up with a plant program, but we're putting the cart before the horse, no? Or whatever. So if you know, before you're supposed to plant, you should have access to post-harvest, no? But what our government thinkers or government planners are doing, they just hope that farmers can dry their corn in the highway. No? So, and that's not a good policy, good strategy for our corn farmers. No? And that's where most of the injustice actually occurs. No? Next, please. Next slide, please. So if you look at the value chain of corn, no? Central to the value chain is actually the post-harvest facilities. No? And unfortunately, the post-harvest is the least desirable link in the chain, no? Because it entails huge investments and not so attractive returns. No? And the margins are very, very small, and you need to have a huge economy of scale, no, to actually make it work. No? Our government is trying to extend its resources by spreading out too thinly, no, to many farmers' organizations, provided them with small post-harvest facility, which has not, which doesn't have the economy of scale, no. And that's what we call sachet mentality, or the tingi program. No? And a lot of these facilities given out by government to farmers' organizations who don't have the capacity to manage it properly, and it is highly, grossly undercapitalized in the first place. It has no chance to succeed. No? So this is really a major challenge, and that's why many governments, including the United States, which is the most advanced agricultural country in the world, they still view this is supposed to be a sector that needs a lot of government support through subsidies. No? And that's why they put a lot of their subsidies in the primary production, in particular the grains, because the moment they support the grains industry, it will redound, no? It will go through the value chain and help support their livestock and food sector. No? So that's how critical it is. So any dollar that they put as a support to post-harvest is going to benefit down the link, down the chain. In the next slide, also, we have a saying, di ba? Garbage in, garbage out. No? So if you put up a storage facility, you cannot afford to put in low quality. No? So whatever you put in, if it's garbage in and then garbage out. No? And sad to say, this is also extended in the way our government is also establishing or obtaining data. No? Also garbage in, garbage out. I will explain that more later. No? So next, please. So what we really need for our farmers, no, ang main concern yun nila is price, presyo man yun. No? So kung yung dry sa highway, of course, mas gamay man yun ang expected na value. No? Because ang problema sa mais na dry sa highway, especially during sa wet season, lisod kayo siya i-store, no? Because of aflatoxin contamination. No? And dili siya matagaan o sakto na presyo, no, sa iyang mais, kay most of the corn that he will be producing will go to the traders, and the traders do not have the capacity to handle properly the grains of the farmers. So the inefficiency or incapacity of the farmers or the problems of the farmers are just passed on to the traders. No? And that will be expressed later on in terms of low prices, no? Because the traders will be handling the risk and the problems and the risk of the farmers. And later on, that will be passed on in terms of higher prices to our end users. No? So, ang gusto gid sa atong mga farmer, gusto nila mag-focus lang gid sa farming. No? So, if they can sell their grains, wet basis or tawag nila sa Northern Luzon, sariwa, no? If they will be given a fair price and if possible given an option for future price, then we will be able to empower our farmers. And this can only happen if we have grain centers that can preserve, that can produce, convert the produce of the farmers into high quality grains that can be preserved with long shelf life. So that will be the main starting point for him to market equitably his grains. No? And the grain center will be his venue for trade and other qualities that we need to establish, no, reliability, assurance, convenience, and bulk handling. And I will tackle more on that later. In the next slide, this is the grains marketing securitization that we need to do. No? And this is something that for us, even in Mindanao Grains moving forward, should be able to do if the policy environment is established by the government. No? And this way, farmers can deliver fresh produce, no, which can be in the form of corn on cobs or wet-shelled grains. No? Wet-shelled grains because corn on cob, which is the traditional form, no, of the produce when farmers harvest corn. No? And but with the difficulty in getting farm workers, no, it's getting to be more and more difficult. Many of our farmers now are resorting to mechanical harvesting, no, using combines wherein they will have wet shell grains, no, and that will be a big issue later on, actually, no, because we don't have that capacity to dry corn mechanically. No? When you have mechanical harvesting of corn, then you also need to have mechanical drying of corn. No? But anyway, I'll discuss that a little later. But in this grains marketing securitization, the farmers deliver corn on cob or wet shell grain, and then they will be given a warehouse receipt equivalent to or equitable to what they delivered. No? So more or less, it's about 50% share of recovery from corn on cobs or wet shell grains at about 70% share, and the rest of the grains will go to the grain center. No? So a recovery of corn is about mga 56-57%. No? So the differential will go to as a service fee to the grain center. In terms of wet shell grain, the recovery is about 78-80%. No? So the differential will go again to the grain center. This is just an illustration. That's the final proposition. But the thing here is similar to sugar. When you deliver a sugar, 30% of the recovered crystal sugar goes to the mill, and 70% goes to the farmer as the farmer's share. So once he has the warehouse receipt, the farmer can opt to sell at spot price or sell for future price. No? Or if he's not satisfied with the spot price, he may look at the future price, which is about 2-3 months or 4 months after harvest season. And normally 2-3 months after the harvest season, prices should appreciate. And with a warehouse receipt, he can actually sell his corn for a future price. Now, this is an international norm. It's something being practiced all over the world, except in the Philippines, probably. No? And the third option is if he's not even satisfied with the future price, 2-3 months after the harvest season, quoted by the buyers, he can opt to sit on his warehouse receipts. In the meantime, he can always go to a bank and request advances against his warehouse receipts. No? And this is a common practice also all over the world except in the Philippines. No? So, and this can only be, of course, possible if there is a post-harvest and storage facility, no? Like the one illustrated. And then later on, the buyer can get the warehouse receipt and later on withdraw from the grain center. No? And the withdrawal, we envision, should be in bulk. No? So what we call bulk chain. So dapat mag-usab na ta na dili na sako-sako. Okay? Ang kakahitabo sa ato karon, sako-sako pagyapon ang pag-transport sa grains, and that's very inefficient. We can save as much as 80 centavos per kilo on the corn, no? By transforming the way we handle corn from sacks to bulk. No? And this is what we hope to incorporate in this grains marketing securitization program. Next slide, please. Before before I can illustrate further, I would like to go back to basic. No? And that's why I wanted to come up with these slides. Ang corn is, as we know very well, is very seasonal because we're rain dependent. No? So we normally start planting corn in April, May. No? Actually, now is the peak of the planting season. And then we harvest after 105, 120 days. No? So when we look at the harvest season, the supply that will come out from the harvest will look like bell shape. No? So if you're familiar with your statistics 101, so it's basically a bell curve, no? And 10-15% of the production is actually coming from the front end of the season, which will, in our case for Bukidnon or Central Mindanao, is towards later part of July, no? So naamang mga farmers na maguna-una og tanom, and they would represent 10-15% of the whole crop. So the bulk of the crop, which is under that bell, is 75-80% is produced within 6 weeks, no, during harvest season. And that occurs in Bukidnon sometime August to middle of September, no? And after that peak season, there will still be remaining. For some reason, some farmers would harvest late, or probably they planted late. And actually, nobody would like to plant late when you're a corn farmer, because all the pests and diseases will go to you, no? So when planting season starts within your vicinity, normally you'll try to plant also together, no? So more or less synchronous na planting. But there will always be tail enders or outliers, and they would represent 10% of the production. Next slide, please. In the next slide, we look at the Norma, the price curve, and the normal behavior of price. So before harvest season, prices tend to be coming from a high level, and then during the harvest season, the peak period, it will go down, no? And towards the end of the harvest season, it will start to go up again, and then normally it will stay at a higher price, much higher than what occurs during the harvest season itself. Next slide, please. If we overlay the the price curve and the supply curve, price curve and supply curve, this is how it looks, no? And this is where we need to have critical understanding when we plan, no? Especially with government, because we want to stabilize the price, no? In as much as there is a price curve, no? We want that price to, as much as possible, make it flat, no? We want to flatten the curve, no? And although there's no chance that we can flatten the supply curve, but the price curve actually we can flatten as much as possible. So what we want for government is to make sure that that price will not go beyond that broken line, which is 13 pesos, 13.25, which is what we call the support price. And normally during the peak harvest season, and this is where 80-90% of our farmers would sell their grains, no? This is where the primary transaction of corn occurs. And during this stage, especially during the wet season, our farmers are selling at distressed prices, meaning below that dotted line, no? So that's why many of our farmers remain poor, no? And for them to get away from this cycle, actually, they should not be selling during this period, no? And if possible, they should be selling during the off-season, no? And if look further in terms of the market, many of our end users, in particular the livestock feed millers and the livestock farms, they can actually only absorb 30% of the peak season volume, no? So meaning 70% of the corn will have no home, no, except going to the traders who do not have the capacity to preserve, to dry and preserve the grains, no? And this is why basically that price curve would go below the intrinsic value for corn, that the intrinsic value that we claim, which is about 13 pesos, 13.25. And that's why we've been advocating that NFA should maintain that 13.25 as the price support for corn. So, but without the infrastructure, there is really no chance to implement this. No, even with NFA, even if NFA has the money to intervene and buy corn, no? They simply do not have the capacity also to buy the corn from the farmers at a wet basis. So ang policy sa NFA, because they do not have the capacity, they try to only buy dried grains class A, which is impossible for our farmers to attain during wet season. So mo ng problema sa atong sa atong planning. Next. So so basically, kung tanaw na itong post-harvest, of course we need a corn sheller, and we need to have large capacity for a corn center. Dili katong paragtong traveling sa sheller. So this has to be they have to be large capacity, industrial scale shelling capacity. And the next component is biomass furnace. When we started, we used diesel, but diesel is very expensive. You need about 20 liters of diesel for every 1 ton of grain. So to dry from 30% to 13% moisture, and that will effectively cost you around 45 pesos per liter. It will be about 90 centavos per kilo of corn that you dry. So with the biomass, you can bring that down to 30 centavos. So ang fuel cost nato, considering the additional investment in biomass furnace and additional labor and additional electrical cost because of the fans and other things that you need to operate a biomass furnace. And still, it is more or less about only a third of the cost of fuel when you convert to biomass. And then another component is corn on cob dryer. For the Philippines, we normally harvest our corn at around 30% moisture during wet season. In some parts of the country, during the dry season, they can opt to harvest their corn even as low as 20% moisture. We don't recommend that farmers harvest their corn below 20% moisture, meaning the corn will be staying in the field much longer, so that they can bring the moisture down below 20. If they do that, aflatoxin problem would occur. Kaya ang aspergillus, or the fungi that's responsible for the production of aflatoxin, they occur when corn grains have moisture content of about 15 to 20% moisture. That's why it's called a storage fungi, but still it can occur in the field when corn grain moisture is about 15 to 20%. So, but here, in the post-harvest, ang problema na to when corn is still at 30% moisture, ang crown niya, or the head of the corn, the grain, is still soft. If you look at katong mga familiar with maize, makita nila na katong pinaka-crown sa maize is a little bit yellowish. So may pagka-milky siya. And this is brought about by when they hybridize the corn. Most of the native corn that we have that are resistant to downy mildew, siguro katong mga familiar with corn breeding, katong mga native na corn, flint type siya, we call it flint type, so gahi pati ang iyang ulo, but when they introduced high-yielding varieties, they crossed it with temperate corn, which is similar to the US, and it's a little bit yellowish and soft, no? Ang form. They call it a dent type of corn. So when they crossbreed this, for the reason that they want to increase yield, taas og kanang naay feature sa corn na siya pagka dent gamay, no? Especially the crown. And when you shell this at 30% moisture, there will be internal cracking or breakage that would occur, no? So mas maayo kung i-pre-dry lang sa ang mais down to 20 before you actually shell it, no? So in the US, in temperate countries, they can afford to leave their corn in the field when they harvest because it's not rainy or wet during their harvest season, September, October. And by the time they harvest the corn, the moisture content is between 20 to 25% moisture, no? So walay problema sa ila when they harvest at that moisture level sa corn. But in the Philippines, especially sa Bukidnon, no, ang moisture content is 30 and even beyond 30, no? Especially even myself, no, when corn grains is already ang corn grains moisture is already 35%, it's usually mature already, meaning katong umbilical cord sa mais that iyang gagamiton para to get nutrients from the plant, maputol na to siya, no? And but the grains itself is still 35%, so wala naman siya in terms of dry matter, wala naman siya kakakuha from the plant, no? So ako mismo, after mag 35% ng moisture, ako na siyang i-harvest because I already have that in mind na dalon man ako sa Mindanao Grains for drying, no? So sa Mindanao Grains, we have corn on cob dryer that will bring down the moisture to 20 before we shell, no? So this is important na aspect for the farmers na kung mag-opt siya, if he decides na to do early harvest, he can also do so, no? And in our case sa Bukidnon, this is very important kay it is too wet, no, during wet season, and field damage can occur, no? Especially kung ang grain moisture is below 30%, no? Second is gusto sab nimo na makuha na nimo daan ng imo mga farm workers to harvest your corn, no? So if you can plan early, you have a bigger chance that you can organize the harvesting when corn moisture is still above 30%, no? And then third also is rampant kaayo ang pilferage sa farms, no, sa Bukidnon, no? And this is a social problem, no? They call it sackworm or two-legged worm, no? So basin maunhan ka sa imong silingan. So as much as possible, when they're ripe, you harvest it. Don't even wait for the grains to dry up in the field to below 30%. The longer it stays in the field, the more it is being attacked by fungi or by two-legged pests, no? So so there's really a need to pre-dry the grains on the cob, no? And also in the process of pre-drying the grains on the cob, we also dry the cob itself, no? So ang cob during harvest, when the grains moisture is 30%, ang cob moisture is nasa mga 40 to 50%. And at that moisture, you cannot actually use it as a fuel cob, no, or fuel na biomass. So you still have to dry the cobs before you can feed it into the furnace, no. But pre-drying it on the cob will bring down the moisture also to about mga 25-30% na level, and then it stays in the fuel bins for a few weeks. Then you can actually use them, no, during the season. So that's one of the main advantage of having the corn on cob dryer, no, as a additional advantage. Next, please. Then after shelling from the corn on cob dryer, we shell. Then it goes into the grains dryer. No? Next slide, please. In that next slide, we use large grains dryer, no, mechanical dryer. And next slide, please. In this illustration, this is probably the biggest, one of the biggest dryers in the country. The other one is actually also owned by Mindanao Grains in the north. No? And this grain dryer can do around 15-20 tons per hour, no, dry basis. Actually, we operate this dryer at 40-50 tons per hour, no, flow rate, and then the grains would pass twice actually into the dryer. And for semi-dry corn, we can actually do 25 to 30 tons per hour using this dryer. And this is important because to consider, given that we target about 15 to 20,000 tons during the peak period. And during this peak period for about 45 days, this type of dryers will run 24/7. And the downtime is the downtime schedule is only around 8 to 10 hours every week, no? When we have to clean the screens, no? But otherwise, it will be operating 24/7 throughout the week, no? And this is critical because during peak harvest season, we have to maximize our output, and we can only have those grains, most of it at reasonable price during that peak period, as I've illustrated, no? And the type of equipment that we need to put in should be reliable, no? So and the components should be the proper components, no? Unfortunately, like many of the local programs of our government, mga dryers, these are not industrial grades, no? Meaning they're using mild steel, and then the motors are not actually the same grade as industrial motors that we use for post-harvest, no? Not all electric motors are the same, no? Like the electric motor of your aircon, that can only operate, you can only operate that for 12 hours a day, no? Otherwise, it will break down, no? But this type of motors, like the ones we are using in Mindanao Grains, we still have plenty of motors that up to now, no, after 20 years, they're still running, no? But what is critical there is that during that 60-day period, the uptime should be maximized, no? So meaning there's almost no downtime, no, during that peak period. So you're going to stress out all the equipment, and after that 60 days, then you can do your major maintenance programs, no? But otherwise, it has to be in a tip-top condition, and you just hope that all the components of the dryer will be able to sustain throughout the season, no? So this is something that is still not very clear with our government planners. But in many countries, including India, no, they've already came up with the proper standards for the grain dryers that they use for the grain centers, no? So these are different types of components. They're quite expensive, but reliable. Next, please. Next, then we also have to store in bulk, no? Ang problema sa storage in bulk is, as I've said, garbage in, garbage out, no? So when you have contaminated grains, no, let's say grains that are 16% moisture, no? And when we put in the silo, given the climatic condition of the Philippines, no, under tropical condition, the grain should be below 14% moisture. Otherwise, it will sweat, no? Magsingot siya, no? And it will start respiring, no? And once the grains respire, it will also affect the grains around it, no? And it will trigger a chain reaction. No? And that's what we call technically as moisture migration. So when a small part of the silo, no, is contaminated with semi-dry corn, 16%, 18%, kanang tawag nato sa trade na balabala, no? Basi nag-deliver og grains. So when you buy grains na dried in the highway, di makakabalo kung tanan ba to siya, let's say 400, 500 bags in one truck. Kung dry bag yun to tanan, kay kusahay magpalusot magod ang mga traders, no, even mga farmers. So naay makalusot na semi-dry corn, and when you put it in the silo, it will create that what we call moisture migration. So once the grains respire, it will heat up and it will emit water, no, as a byproduct of respiration, and also it will release the trapped na moisture in the body. Now, when I say na create moisture, is during respiration ang tawagan ni ang O2 and the hydrocarbons, the CH4, no, chain in the how do you call this, the dry matter of the grains, no, in the starch, will be converted into CO2, H2O, and heat, no. So and this will trigger that, as I've said, chain reaction. So it will pass on that additional moisture to the nearby grains, and those nearby grains will absorb the moisture, and then will trigger respiration, and then it will contaminate itself, no, with aspergillus, and after 2-3 months in the silo, the whole silo will be contaminated, no? And to some point during the moisture migration, it will create caking, no? It will produce caking phenomenon in the silo, so mo gahi siya, and then during the discharge of the silo, lisod siya ipagawas kay nag-cake naman siya, no? Kung magawas man, dili siya balanse ang pagawas sa silo, ang grains, no? And maybe just one side of the silo, no, especially katong gakaigo sa kuan, no, gakaigo permi sa adlaw, maybe dry, wala kay siya naigo agto moisture migration, siya ang muuna og flow, no. Katong the other side of the silo, which is normally bugnaw, and dito nagdagan ang mga moisture, nag-concentrate ang moisture, mag-caking siya, and that can even result na into tawagani kanang matumba ang silo, no. So sadly, it occurred also here in the Philippines, no. We know very well, no, that one grain facility na gapamalit lang og mga kuan, mais gikan sa dalan na wala giagi sa kuan, sa bulk storage, wala giagi og mechanical dryer, so contaminated ang mga grains, and then natumba ang silo, and then pagkatumba sa silo, ang upat, nag-domino effect, upat ka silo ang natumba, no? So and this is really sad because I talked to one of the major na feed miller in the Philippines, and she was telling me that they don't like to put local grains into their silo, and that's because of this. No, and I told her that, yeah, that's understandable. No, you cannot put, you know, corn dried in the highway and you put it in the bulk silo. No, and that's going to be dangerous. No, and the only way for you to, they invested a lot, no, in putting up bulk storage facilities. And San Miguel is also, they already improved all their feed mill facility to receive and store grains in bulk. No, but ironically, they don't use it for local corn. They use it for feed wheat and imported corn. No, kay dili daw kuno pwede ibutang ang atong mais sa sulod sa ilang silo, and that's very serious. No, and ironically, no, tawagan ni, so when you look at the situation using you analyze the situation using game theory na economics, no, the issue of displacement is much more vicious, no, much more punitive. No, so mas grabe ang penalty. No, so meaning lugar kung kita, kami ng mga corn farmers, when we go to a feed miller na puno naman ang iyang silo o imported na grains, dili namin makasulod. No, especially during wet season, peak harvest, kung saan mo pagbaligya sa mga feed millers na puno naman ang ilang mga silo. No, although they have some local purchases, tawagan ni, they put it in their regular warehouse, but the bulk of their bulk facility, bulk storage silo is actually used for imported grains. But that's why it's more critical for us to develop bulk storage facilities in the post-harvest area. No? And this should be separate from the capacity of the feed millers. Next, please. As I've said, we should go bulk. And going bulk, we can save, as I mentioned, 80 centavos per kilo. And this is my proposition, our proposition, Maize, ever since 20 years ago, that we have to transform the industry in terms of delivering or moving the grains in bulk. No, Vietnam and Thailand underwent this transformation 20 years ago, no? More than 20 years ago in the case of Thailand, and they've been successful in improving their industry. No, so meaning they almost never heard that they move grains in sack anymore. No, just like sa oil is traded by the barrel, but they don't move oil by the barrel. No, so it has to be moved in bulk. So next slide, please. This is what we try to do. No, as a compromise, we put it in bulk sacks, this 1-tonner sack, and load it in a vessel, so it's easier to move and cheaper. No, and and we can reuse the bulk bags. So, and the rate of movement is much faster than doing it by sack. No? But ironically, sa Cagayan de Oro, even if you load in bulk sa pier sa Cagayan de Oro, they will charge you still 18 katao, no? As if na sila 18 katao nag-move sa imong grains in sacks, no? But that's something else that we need to correct, no? So, but anyway, because it is very unusual that there are companies moving grains already in bulk, no? Next, please. So these are the critical government support, the policy support that we need, no, sa government. And I would like to emphasize first, no, adhere to global standards of food and feed safety, particularly aflatoxin level at 20 parts per billion maximum. to create demand for mechanically dried grains and storage in bulk. As you probably know, ang atong government is allowing at 50 ppb, no? Ang kaning atong mga commercial feeds, no? Although Codex standard or the world standard is 20 ppb, but since we do not have the capacity to actually supply corn at low aflatoxin contamination, which is 20 parts per billion maximum, our government agreed to compromise at 50 ppb, which is 250% above world standard. And it doesn't create that urgency among our corn buyers to adhere, to buy good quality corn. So investments like Mindanao Grains is a bit too advanced and somehow lonely, no? Kung ikaw lang ang player or gamay lang ang players that can supply 20 ppb corn, ang kakahitabo, like walay incentive sa mga feed millers. They say they will buy 20 truckloads from Mindanao Grains, and then the next 80 truckloads to fill up the silo, di pang bulad lang sa highway. So wala incentive na mo palit at a higher price ang feed miller sa imo, kay iya ra mangyapong i-commingle dito sa mga pangit na mais, no? So unless there will be enough capacity, no, of mechanically dried corn, then perhaps the norm will be a change. And for corn that is not properly dried, the penalties will be much more severe, no? Or in other words, there will be much more premium given to corn that has been dried properly. So, and then if we put in the necessary infrastructure in the post-harvest and storage, then we can move the grains in bulk. So it has to be primed by the government, no? That we have to target that, change the whole industry into bulk chain, no? This is something that supposedly in many countries, it is not something that is being debated, no? It's something that it's a necessary thing to do, no? And they cannot understand why we're not changing, no? Even India used to be also used to store grains in sacks, no? But in the last 20 years, they've aggressively modernized the way they store grains and move grains by bulk. And that discipline has an effect down to how you harvest your corn and how you do the post-harvest, no? Then next is solid information. So we have to create a farm registry system and transform agri-food statistics from survey method to more precise and timely information using GIS, remote sensing, and artificial intelligence. And I think this is also an international norm right now. Even Cambodia is already doing this, and somehow we're left behind, no? And for many students in agricultural engineering, the trend now is, or the norm now is not a trend. It's already a norm that when you engage into grain production, you have to incorporate GIS, RS, and AI. You know? So meaning precision agriculture na takaron, no? And somehow we're lagging behind. Next is, of course, sound tax policies. And I think Engineer Navarro has expounded on this. No? In particular, actually, we want that expanded withholding tax on farmers in particular, because we have a policy that when you sell more than 300,000 pesos, and that will take only 2 or 3 hectares to do, no? you will be taxed by the government, no? Or the government will compel major buyers like Mindanao Grains or San Miguel to impose 1% withholding tax. No? And that will inadvertently put post-harvest operators who invested in a lot of infrastructure in a disadvantage, because the ordinary trader will not have to, they don't need to follow these rules. No? But anyway, that's for another perhaps another forum. Next, please. I don't know how to explain this briefly, but we in Maize, we have a proposal to the government to come up with funding this post-harvest facilities using what we call viability gap fund. Under this viability gap fund, this is a program actually being implemented in India and supported by the World Bank. And the strategy here is for government to plug that viability. Kung, if it's not profitable enough for the private sector of course will not invest. And obviously for post-harvest facilities, there's not enough private sector interest. And this is where government comes in and plug in that viability by subsidizing as much as 20% of the capital expenditures of the investment. In our case, we're asking a government to provide the funds that they have for the corn program as an equity capitalization for our farmers organization to top finance sector to provide the 80% balance plus working capital. So instead of relying, let's say if government has 1 billion for post-harvest, that should not be used to build a 1 billion facility. That should be what government needs to do is to tap the finance sector so that the finance sector will finance 80% of the capex requirement of the program. In that way, we can use the financial sector to really expand rapidly our post-harvest infrastructures. And again, this is an international norm, so I do not know why Department of Agriculture is not taking advantage. In fact, NEDA Secretary, our NEDA Secretary is recommending this type of strategy. So just to illustrate, tawagan if we need to set a certain target. As I've said, ang government doesn't want to deal with the universe or the end. What's the actual requirements? So if we have about 1.2, 1.3 million hectares of corn, then we have to have at least 130 billion of investment for post-harvest. But what's happening now, there's only less than 10% capacity of. So we need to improve that by putting up a target at least 20% in the next 5 years. And that may cost about 25 billion. And the first reaction of government is we don't have the money for it. It's not entirely true. If mula ginasulti nila, if kung gusto na may paraan, pag ayaw, may dahilan. They already have 1 billion fund for every year, but they use it in tingi-tingi na method. So it's not effective. It doesn't. They don't have the economy of scale. But if they use it as a counterpart fund to bring in bank finance, then they can leverage it 5 times. So that 1 billion becomes a 5 billion program every year. So in the next 5 years, it becomes 25 billion. So it's very easy. It's a no-brainer actually. And given that we have a risk cover under the Agricultural Guarantee Fund pool, these are the penalties collected from non-compliance from Agri-Agra law, in which AGFP has now more than 12 billion. And in terms of industry practice in the guarantee market, they can leverage it 10 times the face value. They're not even using AGFP based on its face value. When as a guarantee fund, it should be guaranteeing 10 times its face value. So meaning if they have 12 billion, they should be covering 120 billion of projects. So in other words, when the bank lends 4 billion to the post-harvest project, as a whole, there's actually no risk among the banks, participating banks, because they can enroll it under the Agricultural Guarantee Fund pool, AGFP. And basically, it's risk-free. So meaning, in the event of failure, the banks can draw money from the AGFP. So in other words, in terms of funding, there is available fund. This is what I'm trying to say in this slide. And then I would like to also discuss this concept of critical information, which I mentioned earlier. Garbage in, garbage out. Our Philippine Statistical Authority has been using a survey method for all these years. And I do not know if some of you are familiar with how PSA creates the number. Creates meaning, in my opinion, they're inventing the numbers. But as a science, what they do is they survey the intention to plant. So during February, March, for example, when this is the time when the farmers are making up their mind whether to plant or not. And PSA has a set of responders that they monitor to gauge what will be the preference of the farmers, and in that way they can estimate the total hectareage to be planted for the next season. So since it's a survey method, it's considered as soft data. And this is where PSA usually ends their survey. Sometimes when there is an adverse event, like a drought or pest or typhoon, they can make some adjustments in the final crop estimates later. But if we look at how we generate the number, this is the international norm. Planting intention is just one of the critical number. But after this, they follow it through with seed sales, and then once the farmers plant, they can use remote sensing or GIS, so they will know that the seed sales are actually translated into actual planting, and then in the mid-season of the planting, government usually come up with a pollination survey, except our government, of course. And this is very critical. In the US, this is, I think, July 13 or July 1, when they come up with the data. July 1 is the start of the survey. And this is something that is many in the commodity exchange would wait, whether the pollination has been successful or not. So, and then, of course, at the end of the harvest, if we have grain center, then we can monitor the grain production in terms of actual number. And one of the other cross number that our government is looking at also is corn importation. We in Philmais, we monitor this very, very closely because we want to see the competitiveness or the the competition or the environment that we are in. So we look at the cost parity. So most most economic managers would look at cost parity. So kung 13 pesos ang cost to import feed wheat, 13 pesos po ang atong local corn. When 16 pesos, 16 pesos. When it's 9 pesos, 9 pesos po ang atong maize, because there will be a pressure in the market that we will conform to that cost parity, which is not entirely correct. And if I may, actually is very, very inaccurate. But this is but it's still a very important number. So later on, if you want me to discuss about cost parity issues, I can do that. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So farm registry and crop estimation. So this is what I meant. So dapat nagit ay hard basis. So GIS, remote sensing, and lately I added that AI technology, a standard tool for planning, decision, policy making. Unfortunately, kanang AI na side, wala pa kayo nato na develop. Even sa Ateneo, they stopped teaching, offering game theory, because they don't have the teachers. So during our time, we had we're fortunate to have two professors who could teach us game theory. So I think some of you are already very familiar with GIS and remote sensing. Next, please. So I added this slide. As I've said, many of our farmers are having problem with farm workers. The good side actually is these harvesters, they have GPS tracker, and with a GPS tracker, and you have the capacity, the ability to measure the yield, or they can monitor the yield. You can come up with techniques wherein you can divide your farm into grids and observe the productivity on a per grid basis. So if you have let's say 10 hectares, you can divide it per 100 square meters na grid, and you can observe what is your yield on that per 100 square meters, and then you can see the differences, the variances in the yields per grid, and with that observation, you can analyze better. Maybe in some part of your field, it's not giving you the yield that you want, and it may be yielding much lower than other part of your farm. And this is where probably later on you can improve that portion of your field. And this is possible because many of our farmers now have started shifting to mechanical harvesting, and this mechanical harvesters, what we call combine harvester, meaning it can pick up and then shell at the same time, and produces wet shell grains. They have GPS tracker already. So, and this also solves the problem of our farmers in the field, because the number of farm workers are getting to be more and more difficult to get. No? They're going down, and with other programs like Pantawid program, there's lesser farmers that would be joining these ranks. No? So unfortunately, it's some of our farm workers are not motivated to work in the farms anymore because of this four-piece program of our government, and that's a common, observation of our farmers. So of course they still work, but not the same rate or the same capacity as before. But what is more actually significant to this, or the effect of this, is actually it will put more pressure on the post-harvest drying. So as more farmers use combine harvester, if you mechanize the harvesting, you also need to mechanize the drying. So, and government has to put in, we have to put in more pressure on government to really provide more support in terms of post-harvest. Another feature in the advancement of technology in the post-harvest, like what we use in Mindanao grains and perhaps some few post-harvest operators, we're actually using now optical sorter. No? In this, in particular, we're using Bueller, no? And some of our rice millers are actually using also similar technique. No? In Thailand, for the rice milling industry in Thailand, this is already a norm. No? All over the world is for the milling industry. This is actually a norm already. No? But mostly for food grade application. In our case, we use this for breeder grade, no? Because the breeder grade of our clients, the quality that they need for their corn, no, to feed their breeders is the same as food grade. No? Actually, there's no difference between toxicity effect of aflatoxin on humans and animals. No? Animals also need the same level of safety as humans. No? So I do not know if that's clear with our government. So towards my end of my presentation, and next please. We've outlined a roadmap, no, for us to develop our industry. The next slide, please. So, but starting with coming up with enabling policies, no. So we need to have a buffer stock, no. Ang problema sa ato, in the case of rice, we only have a policy of 15 days, no, buffer stock. For corn, there is no clear mandate for corn. No? But in the industry, they want to have some level of security. No? In most countries, like China, India, Korea, Japan, they always maintain 365 days of buffer stock. No? The moment their buffer stock goes down, they move quickly to replenish their buffer stock. In China, when they have a bad harvest of corn, and they are forced to draw a lot from their food security stocks, that it has gone down to below 7 months. No? The government has been aggressively buying corn at equivalent to 19 pesos per kilo, and then they're importing, I think, almost 60% of the available stock in the world market right now. Far from usual exporter of grains now to biggest importer of corn. They used to export 10-20 million tons of corn, but now they're trying to import 60 million tons of corn, and to supply the needs of their market, at the same time replenish their food security stock. But as a policy, as expressed in terms of rice, we only have we only impose 15 days. No? With the passage of RTL and the small budget that Congress has given to NFA, our food security stock under NFA is already down to less than 5 days. No? And this is actually a violation in our national laws. No? And yet, we're touting somehow that hopefully that the private sector will fill in that gap. No? And as we express our concern to government, that we cannot rely on the private sector to do the buffer stock, because the private sector's aim is to make money, and when you maintain a buffer stock, there's a big chance that you're going to lose money, but for the sake of stability. No? But anyway, we have to have that because in the process, government would need to provide the infrastructure to preserve the grains, and this is where post-harvest would come in. So we're just trying to lay down the groundworks, and it is also part of actually the implementation of Magna Carta of small farmers and Agri-Agra law. So we also need to come up with a commodity exchange system, which is like the warehouse receipts. No? And then hopefully we can come up with a corn development administration. I think Engineer Navarro has presented this. No? In the next slide, we hope that we can put up enough post-harvest facility in the key corn area. No? What we try to envision is for government intervention to make sure that in the next 5 years, we can put up, we can cover 20% of the needs, you know, of our corn sector. And for us to do this, perhaps we can encourage the Department of Agriculture to target the first 10%, no? And the local government units, especially with the Mandanas Garcia ruling, they will have more funds. They can also invest, no? Cover at least 10% of the requirement of for post-harvest in their municipalities. No? And that effectively that will cover 20% in the next 5 years. No? In the following second 5 years, the forerunners can actually reinvest, no? And double up that capacity. No? So aside from the grains facility, we have to have in the next slide please. Next slide pa. We have a program with Maize, what we call Kalimbugas, no, program, or the rice corn blend. This is actually one way to develop a market for corn grits, you know, so that we will not be too dependent on the feed market. No? We have to include in this post-harvest facility rice mill and corn mill, no? And in particular, we have to use a parboiling system already, you know, for rice milling. In many countries, especially Thailand, they've already transformed their rice milling to parboiling. No? And parboiling, you can get higher recovery for your grains. And then you can get the maximum nutrition, no? Almost to the same level as brown rice. No? So using a parboiling. And parboiling is actually the norm in rice milling from Bangladesh all the way to Morocco. No? And but Thailand has actually adapted and improved the techniques of parboiling. No? And this is something that we in Maize also would like to adopt. Next, please. And then the other program in the roadmap that we hope to develop is, of course, the commodity exchange system, wherein the warehouse receipts of our farmers will be extended, no, in terms of marketing reach. No? So if we deliver our corn in a grain center and we're given a warehouse receipt, our marketing reach can be maximized if there is a commodity exchange system wherein we can channel electronically our warehouse receipts to be traded in that exchange. So, well, basically that's my presentation. I think the last part is we hope that as corn farmers, we will be able to develop also the soya production. No? And there are GM technologies already for soybean that are suited for tropical condition. No? Brazil has been very successful in breeding soybeans, no, for tropical areas. No? And this is something that we hope that we can develop. Now, 20% of feed demand for the feed formulation is actually soybeans, no, and soybean is also good for rotation for our farmers, so to improve the nitrogen content of the soil. And this is normally done in many parts of the country, but in the world. But in the Philippines, our corn farmers are only doing corn. No? Sometimes rice, corn. But the most appropriate rotation for corn is actually soybean. So as it is, I think that's my presentation for our corn industry roadmap. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for that presentation. I know it was we really learned a lot from your discussion for today. So now let's go to our first question. This is from Derby Frias, from Xavier University Junior High School. So ang question niya po is, do we have a centralized data or update regarding the demand and supply? And do our LGUs know about the updates of the demand? I mean, are the LGUs well informed about the data?
Actually, that demand, supply demand statistics is still very contentious, no? Even up to now, and we always have a big fight. No? Quarterly, we're supposed to have meeting with the DA and PSA regarding that. Before they make it public, normally they ask us to review, no, and criticize the report. And as always, there's always been a limitation on the PSA side, no, because they haven't shifted to GIS yet. No, in most countries they have a GIS-based system, no, in collecting the data. So on a macro point of view, still we don't have that accurate, no, information. But over the years, in statistics, for as long as you know more or less what is your margin of error, no? So even if you're not as accurate, no, but while you live with that inaccuracy, what is really important is the trend, diba? In statistics, it's not actually the raw data or the, you know, it's actually the trend that you would like to see, no? So we do have that. And for corn, I think Engineer Navarro has presented this already, no? And we produce about 8 million metric tons of corn, no? Of which 2.2, 2.3 is white corn, no? And the rest is yellow corn. So we produce about 6 million metric tons of yellow corn. And industry right now are saying that they need about 10 million. So there's a shortfall of 4 million tons per year, no, in terms of yellow corn, no. And this is plugged by importation, no? And the importation is mainly by feed wheat, not by corn. Feed wheat is a substitute to corn, no? So they're saying in effect that um, we're getting self-sufficiency because of importation of feed wheat, which is about 3 to 4 million metric tons per year, no? Our contention actually is the market only needs about 2.5 million metric tons of feed wheat plus the importation of corn under minimum access volume, no? So meaning there's still a lot of corn being imported uh, to about mga 500,000 metric tons to 1 million metric tons per year. So combined, that should be enough. But the problem that we are having now actually, and this is not very clear with the local governments, by the way, no? Because most of the local governments have only a parochial uh, view of the market, no? Meaning what what they can actually see is the price posted by traders, no? or the programs and the information posted by the government, no? So but the critical numbers in terms of importation, local production and importation are beyond actually from the level of the local government. So this is why we still have to, as much as possible, most of the agricultural policies should still be handled by the Department of Agriculture despite the devolution. So ang mo lang nito problema. So we do not know actually we know that the numbers are not accurate, but we can see the growing trend.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you so much for that, sir. No, so really, there is still a lot to improve with our with the data on how we process those data. And I think you've mentioned it in your presentation earlier that there is really a need for to improve and to make it more precise and more accurate through GIS also, no, and to AI na din.
Yeah, in fact, I recommended to our national government somebody like Dr. Edgar Po should run uh, BSWM and implement the GIS system, no? So that we can overhaul the way we collect data of the government. But up to now, they put somebody who's not not capable, no, of implementing this kind of radical programs.
Yes, nga po. Oo nga po. So now po, let's go to our second question. This is from Engineer Elenito Boyduran, a faculty of Xavier University College of Agriculture.
Sure.
So Sir Boy po is asking, there is a technology applicable for small-scale farmers called hermetic grain storage by a company called Grain Pro. Why is it that there's no campaign in this technology by the government?
Well, tawagan I'm familiar with Grain Pro and I'm using it, no, and it's a little bit awkward to use, no, but it may be applicable to farmer na level, and it should be promoted. In fact, tawagan in many countries, there are even developed na ilang bulk chain, no. They're still using this. No? The US can actually accommodate only about 60% or 60% of their crop inside the silo. Now, the rest of these are stored in bulk outside the silo or in bulk silo bags. No, this is all. This is this is actually an old technology already. No? So we tried this more than 20 years ago already, but at best it is only for takip butas lang. No, it's not something that tawagan as our foundation, no, for our program. It can be a good complement to our program, no? And then when it comes to getting into the warehouse receipt systems and other things, no, and having it stored in your farm will not bring you up to the level of securitized marketing later on, no? We will come up with policies. No, I know we're looking at some experience in India. No, in particular, when they're using this technology widely, and somehow they're able to incorporate it in their warehouse receipt system. Maybe we can adopt this, but this is I think in India, if we just have to be careful because they use it mainly for wheat, no, and ang wheat when they harvest, they don't need to dry, no. So most of the time when they harvest wheat, there's no need for post-harvest, no. They can dry it in the field. They actually spray it with glyphosate so that it will ripen at the same time, and then they will have a more or less uniform dried crop, no. So it's a little bit different. So ang ato ng purpose when we do the post-harvest is not just by the end of it by itself, no. We look at it as something that how we can move our grains forward into the system.
I see. Thank you so much, sir, for clearing that up. No, because actually, that's also very interesting. And thank you so much, pala sa nag-ask na si Sir Boy. That was a very interesting question. So now po, let's move to our third question. Somebody is asking po, why is mechanized harvesting not widely adapted in the Philippines? What are the reasons of the adaptation of this technology, and how do we address this?
Well, sooner, no, actually it will be adopted by, by hook or by crook, no, it will be adopted. But actually because of shortage of farm workers, no, so we will be mechanizing. But earlier experience here in particular here in Bukidnon, it's of no use because there is no post-harvest facility. So even if you have a mechanical harvester or combine, no, like a good friend of mine has, no, after 5 days, he cannot operate anymore because there's no other place to dry the corn. No, when you harvest corn on the cob, you can buy time. No, you can still store the corn on cob even a week or two, no, before it starts heating up, no, or respiring, no. But when you do the combine, ma-shell na siya, respiration would occur in the first 24 hours, no. After 3 days, sira na lahat, no. So you're just going to aggravate the problem. But somehow by hook or by crook, because the concern of our farmers is farm labor, it will evolve, no. But then in the case of I think especially with rice, no, it will be more mechanized, no. For corn, it will be to a certain level because a lot of our corn are planted in sloping areas, no. So in marginal areas. So only the corn that are planted in prime agricultural land, meaning 18% slope, no, or less, will be benefited from mechanical harvesting.
I see. Thank you so much for that, sir. So, yes. So now let's move to our next question. This is from Reynald Hi from Cebu. Um, he is asking po if there is a private government partnership to uplift or modernize our corn production in Mindanao and Visayas areas. And then follow-up question na po, is there any a cooperative involved for this?
Tawagan ni. When you say production, kung in the field, there's actually no need, no. We have the area to expand. We have present area that is already producing significant volume based on our demand for corn. What we really need to address when it comes to PPP, I do not know what he pertains, but I think it refers more to the post-harvest and storage infrastructure, no. So sa karon, gamay pa lang ang level. So as I've said, it's less than 10%, and it's a drop in the bucket, no. So Philippine Maize Federation, I think, would be in the best position actually to negotiate with the government, come up with the investment so that there will be more uh, standardization in the process, no? The type of equipment, tawagan ni, and it has to be PPP because under government procurement system, you will be, you will be limited to the most inferior equipment available in the market. No? So under PPP, then you can have that liberty to get the best equipment available in the market.
Okay, thank you so much for that, sir. So, Jodil, user Jodil po. Our next question is from Jodil, still from our Facebook viewer. Good afternoon po. What is the latest update for the production of corn during this pandemic?
Well, tawagan ang role mo sa farmer is to plant. So, what we've seen so far, the production is not as bad, no, as we thought. So, in fact, DA, according to official figures, no, there's a slight increase in production, although we beg to disagree. If there is a decline in production, it's not that significant, meaning it's not more than 10% decline in production. Because at the end of the day, the farmers still need to make a living.
I see. That's good to hear now that there is a slight na increase in production, even though we're still it's still during this pandemic. So at least that's a good thing. That's good to know. So now po, those are the questions that we have. But sir, we have a last request lang po from you. So any last message to all of our viewers who are watching, especially since most of our viewers are really from the academe. So what can you any parting message for them po?
I think what we need to convey to society in general that a post-harvest is a public good. It's a public good, and as a public good, it needs public investment or public support to go support from government. So that's one. So that is not something that we hope that the private sector would come in and put in the necessary investment. If that's the case, then we wouldn't be talking about post-harvest issues, di ba? Second is, I think, especially for the sector in the academia and agriculture in particular, we also have to think, in terms of philosophy, di ba? That a post-harvest is not the responsibility of our farmers. So it's not a primary responsibility. Daghan na kaayo trabaho ang farmers. The biggest part of his income should be coming from planting corn. Di ba? A post-harvest, if ever you're going to make a little bit extra profit, it's not that significant anymore. No. And the risks are higher to warrant that cannot warrant that additional income. No. So I think what we need as farmers, some form of security and stability in our livelihood, and that's where the post-harvest becomes very critical. So, and if we have that thought, if we have that philosophy, perhaps we can improve the way we approach agriculture in general. So I think for me, that's my critical message to everybody.